Hi, Jenny Rearick with Fit to Speak. I'm going to start doing more videos on the skills that I teach as opposed to just writing about them. And this first one that I want to do it on is what I feel is the most important speaking skill, the one that a lot of us don't do or we could improve on, but I think it has the biggest impact on not only your perception of yourself when you're communicating or maybe public speaking in a more formal sense, but also how people that you speak to are perceiving you and the ease with which they can understand your message. And that is to incorporate deliberate pauses into your speaking. What do I mean by that? I mean, between your thoughts and sentences, you are consciously choosing to stop talking and to give a moment of space. That moment of space, there's a benefit for you as the speaker and then for your listeners. For you as a speaker, that moment of space gives you time to stop and to be in your head and think about what you want to say next. And if you have that space and you're not trying to think of what you're trying to say out loud, what you end up saying will probably be more clearly articulated and easier for people to understand. The benefit to your listeners when you pause is that you're giving them the physical space that they need to take in and connect with and digest what it is you just told them. Anytime I'm teaching this stuff, I remind people that we don't process people's messages in real time. It's not word for word. Often as listeners, we're waiting for people to get to the end of what they're saying. And once they get to the end, then we have that entire message to be able to take in and connect with it. But if that person communicating doesn't break at the end of that thought or that sentence or that point, then as a listener, I have to make a choice. I have to either ignore what they're continuing to say in favor of processing what they've just said, or I have to just hope that I remember because I found it insightful and continue to listen because I don't want to miss what they're going to say next. That's the what. You want to pause between your thoughts and sentences. There's a benefit for you as the speaker, and then there's a benefit for your listeners. I talked a little bit about the why, but to elaborate on that, you need space to think. A lot of us tend to do our thinking out loud. I'm not saying we need to always be in our heads thinking and we can never think out loud. That will also depend on the formality of the situation. But the more you can do your thinking in your head and then express yourself verbally, you're giving your listeners the best of your message. And you're taking the work off of them to have to decipher what's important and how do these pieces fit together. You're doing that in your head before you begin to speak. Now, the question I often get around pausing is there a certain amount of time I should pause? No, I don't hardly ever coach people on pausing for a certain amount of time. Often I say pause long enough that you can take a breath. Something to know though is when you do incorporate more pauses into your speaking, for you as the one speaking, that pause is going to feel like an eternity. But for your listeners, it's going to hear very quickly. And if you put yourself in the shoes of the listener and you pay attention the next time you're listening to someone who does pause, notice how quickly those pauses sound. That's important because if you can appreciate that it's not awkward as the listener, then you're more likely to do it when you incorporate pauses as the speaker. The way I explain how to do this, because I do think that if you can appreciate the logic of why this works and how it works, you're more likely to do it. I don't need you to know more about how to be a better public speaker. I prefer that you actually incorporate these things. And I found this to be the best way to explain it. I call it verbal punctuation. Now, if you were to write me an email, a longer email, you would use punctuation, I hope. You would use punctuation because punctuation, periods, commas, exclamation points, question marks, maybe you bold or underline some things. All of those are used to communicate the structure and tone of your message. In writing, you use punctuation to communicate the structure and tone of your message. When you speak, pausing is your verbal punctuation. Pausing, along with inflection, but we're talking about pausing. Pausing is a great way to punctuate your message so that you can communicate the structure and tone of your message to your listeners. That means as you're speaking, anywhere where you would put a comma or a period, if you were writing what you were saying, is a great place to pause. That's what I do. When I'm speaking, I'm listening for where are there natural breaks in my speaking where a comma might be. That's a great place to put a brief pause. Where am I getting to the end of a thought or a sentence where there would be a period? And that's a place for a deliberate pause. This requires conscious effort initially, just as with building any new skill. But if you think about it like that it's not awkward, it adheres very quickly to your listeners. And from a technical standpoint, the way to execute on it is to be listening for the natural breaks in your speaking and be listening for where your thoughts and sentences end. And those are the two best places to begin to incorporate pausing. I wanted to say one last thing. The added benefit of incorporating more pausing into your speaking is that those pauses will replace most of your filler words. Like, because if you were to transcribe, write out word for word everything you said, and you're someone who uses filler words, you would notice that the majority of those filler words happen between your thoughts and sentences. It's much more difficult to simply coach yourself to stop saying them than it is to just simply build a new habit that replaces your filler words. And that's what a pause does. If I can teach myself to stop talking momentarily between my thoughts and sentences, I will naturally get rid of the majority of my filler words, which is ideal because then when I speak, my speaking comes across much more clearly. I sound more competent. It doesn't mean I am more competent, but I sound more competent. And I'm giving my listeners fewer words, especially words that don't mean anything, fewer words to process so that the real meat of my message is coming across in as few words as possible, meaning that the impact of it will naturally be elevated. That's today's video. Work on it. Try this at home in your personal interactions. Try it at work. You have hundreds of reps throughout the day to practice this. And the more of those reps you can incorporate this idea of pausing between your thoughts and sentences, the easier and more natural it's going to come to you in moments of higher pressure when it really matters. Thanks.